zoning changes for accessory dwelling units. As mentioned in previous hearings, the proposed code changes will affect Title 33. And this policy is part of Council's Columbus Forward initiative. As most of you know by now, I'm Councilmember Otto Beatty, Councilmember for District 7 and at large. My legislative objectives was to identify ADUs as a housing type in the code, which will reduce the requirement variances of ADUs. The goal is to allow for the building of ADUs in all residential districts. Today, we will review the work my office has been doing alongside with the Department of Building and Zoning Services Department and other city departments and stakeholders in the community to arrive at the current draft of the ADU code legislation. We will also review feedback received during our 60-day public comment period and survey and our tentative timeline for the passage of the final legislation. Before I jump to my presentation, I'd like to thank the following people for their time and support in the development of the current draft ADU proposed change. City staff across the departments of the Building and Zoning Services, Development, City Attorney's Office, and Council staff. Leah Boyd, former intern Amadou Agne, Tigga Zemene from my office, Katie Fallon, John Oswald from the Legislative Research Office, Annie McDowell from Councilmember Doran's office, and of course, Councilmember and President Pro Tem Dorans and Council President Harden. I'd also like to thank all my colleagues for council who have supported my ADU code change proposal. And with that, I would like to welcome, With that, I would like to welcome the first presenter to the podium from the Department of Building and Zoning Services, Deputy Director Tony Celebrezzi.
Thank you, Councilmember, for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding your ADU legislation. The Department of Building and Zoning Services appreciated your leadership throughout this process as it unfolded. The opportunity to work with you on this housing-related legislation will benefit the city as a whole as we continue to navigate the current housing challenges. The latest draft that we have reflects input from numerous stakeholders and comments voiced by members of the public during your hearings. We feel this legislation is in a place that will contribute to the housing needs of the city by providing simple solutions for many homeowners. I have with me today Christine Palmer from our zoning section, who will provide a more detailed presentation on the legislation, and we're more than happy to answer any questions where appropriate.
Thank you. Go ahead and proceed.
Good afternoon. As Tony mentioned, I'm Christine Palmer with the Residential Zoning Clearance Section in Building and Zoning Services. And to start out, what is an ADU? Just waiting for the presentation one moment. Great, thank you. What is an ADU? An accessory dwelling unit, and for short, we refer to it as an ADU, is a secondary residential unit that provides complete living facilities in conjunction with the primary dwelling unit. So an ADU includes the following: cooking facilities, sleeping facilities, sanitation facilities, separate ingress and egress. That's where you enter separately and exit separately from the primary dwelling, and it will be located on the same lot as that primary dwelling. Why allow ADUs throughout the city of Columbus? ADUs offer solutions for families to provide housing for aging parents or for children that have graduated high school or are now in college and want a little more independent living. ADUs means of increasing, here we go. There we go. ADUs provide a means of increasing housing supply throughout the city that is at a market-based rental price that doesn't dramatically change the character of the neighborhood. There are essentially three types of ADUs. The first is the interior or central ADU, where you convert say, attic or a basement to a separate dwelling unit. The second is an attached ADU, where you do an actual addition to the primary resident. And then the third is a detached ADU, where you commonly see an ADU above a detached garage. Provisions for the ADUs include allowing them in all residential districts as well as apartment residential districts. They must be clearly accessory to the primary dwelling unit and subordinate in scale to the principal building. They must not exceed 65% of the floor area of the primary dwelling or 1,000 square feet, whichever is greater. And they must not exceed the height of the principal dwelling. Other factors to consider when constructing an accessory dwelling unit, of course, that accessory dwelling unit must meet building code and a building permit must be submitted. And if that accessory dwelling unit is in a neighborhood where there's an architectural review board or historic district, then a certificate of appropriateness will be needed for that ADU. And for any ADUs in a subdivision where there is an HOA, that property owner will need to check with their HOA on any restrictions. And then lastly, of course, with any construction, easements must be adhered to that may limit the location of that ADU. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. The deputy director made reference to all the departments and everything that were involved. Could you explain the role of the Department of Building Zoning Services in the development of this legislation?
So the Building and Zoning has done a lot of research with looking at what ADUs have been passed historically with the council variance process to look at the scale and size of those accessory dwelling units, as well as we've looked at the surrounding communities that have already passed legislation to allow accessory dwelling units by right to see what would be appropriate in terms of the footprints, and then maintaining that scale and form of the community and the neighborhood to see what would fit in best by minimizing the impact to the neighborhood.
Okay, and given that we've examined and looked at ADU legislation from other cities in Ohio and states across the country, what were some of the factors that were used to determine some of the requirements, such as the number of ADUs allowed in certain districts, the size of ADUs, the height, and location requirements?
Sure. We looked at the existing residential districts and the density that they currently allow. So for your single-family districts, we would just allow one single ADU to be located in the rear yard. And then in zoning districts that allow already a 2-unit or a 3-unit dwelling or a 4-unit dwelling, then that ADU allowance increases to allowing 2 on those properties since the density for the district is already higher, as well as then looking at limiting the height for those ADUs so they fit into the property and don't become taller than those existing primary units.
And I also, know that, beyond the core ADU, for instance, the legislation also provides definition and guidelines for what would be considered a habitable space. Can you explain how this differs from ADUs and why it was important to put that into the legislation?
Sure.
And change the code in that way?
So we've commonly have passed council variances, approved council variances for habitable space above, say, a detached garage, where they're not looking for a full dwelling unit, but they are looking for additional habitable space for a den or a play space for the children or a home office where they have a small lot and they're looking to really minimize the building footprint or the impervious surface to that lot and trying to maintain the open space, maintain the rear yard by providing that habitable space above the detached garage. So the ordinance currently as it stands would allow that by right, not a full dwelling unit, but living space that is in a detached structure.
And are there any other ancillary provisions in the legislation that you'd like to point to, such as the side yards, sheds, other things like that?
Sure. With this legislation update, we're taking advantage of modernizing our side yard code currently as it stands. It is very difficult to interpret for lay people as well as developers. So we're simplifying it, making it much more easier to understand and less complex. It doesn't need to be complex. These are side yards. Simplicity is best. As well as with the shed provision, we're updating it and matching it up with the current building permit size, allowing a shed in the rear yard.
And now, we all know that there are already ADUs that exist in our community throughout several neighborhoods. Are the existing and legally permitted ADUs going to be affected by this particular legislation? And any comment that you might have with some of the properties that are non-conforming uses?
Sure. With the current ADUs that have been allowed through the council variances, those will continue to remain unaffected with the ordinance update. They will continue to have those council variances. However, it's very common in our historic districts or older neighborhoods that there are older carriage houses that maybe the permit history isn't as clear to establish those as a use, or we consider it a non-conforming use because currently those districts don't allow an ADU. And this legislation would conform those use, which would be a great benefit to those property owners, especially when they come to refinancing or selling their property. A lot of lenders get very nervous with the word non-conforming, and now those uses would be conforming, which would be a great win for those property owners.
Thank you. And, while we believe that this legislation will provide some good results and outcomes for the community by allowing this, as they've done in other areas of the country and other cities, in the event that there was some unintended consequences or negative outcomes stem from this legislation, or a portion of the legislation was deemed to be unclear, is there an opportunity for future changes or to clarify or include additional procedures?
So the current ordinance is forward-looking. It's allowing the ability to create rules and regulations if they are deemed needed as we roll out the new ordinance, if it's passed, to see unintended consequences that rules and ordinances could help address. As well as we always have the opportunity to update the ordinance in future council actions if we see there's something in the code that was unintended or something that we missed. So it is a fluid code that we can update if the need presents itself.
Okay. At this time, I need to take a short break to allow a member of my staff to provide me a copy of my presentation. Thank you. All right, what I want to do now is just have a short overview of our journey of how we got to the point that we're at now and then where we're going, and then also particularly focus on the review of the feedback that we've gotten from the community, both through the hearings as well as the public survey. All right, so first, I want to make clear that, again, the summary of this legislation is to allow accessory dwelling units in conjunction with a principal dwelling unit or an apartment building in all residential zoning districts, subject to certain guidelines regarding the allowable number of ADUs, the size, the height, and the location. These changes will be made in Title 33. Which will eventually be replaced by Title 34, which is in the zoning movement. Again, we believe that this legislation is consistent with the administration's housing goals to provide, access, stability, opportunity, and it'll be a contributor to Mayor Ginther's commitment of 100,000 new homes and housing units by 2035. I've had a lot of people ask, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? The legislative objectives here are, one is to recognize and define accessory dwelling units as a housing type or building type in Title 33. You see, there's been 110 council variances processes where we've allowed these, but it's not necessarily recognized, in the code. And then we wanted to put a process to allow this, to make this easier for families and homeowners to do this. So we're allowing it by right in all residential zoning districts, thereby eliminating the need for variances in most instances. And when it came down, and this is similar to what I asked the department, we wanted to create standards and requirements for ADUs that were understandable, practical, and maintain safety, zoning integrity, and neighborhood character. Fortunately, we were able to look to many cities and states who have been, who have done this for many, many years, have had ADU legislation, they've seen the outcomes. Seattle has had ADU legislation as far back as 2005 and has had several modifications as they saw how everything rolled out. Our friends at AARP have been working on this issue since 2000. So almost 25 years, this issue of promoting and creating more ADUs in communities has been around. This is not a new thing, okay? And then, we want to provide, again, additional housing options for homeowners and families. And then respond to the market demand and need for more housing and supply. This is a short snapshot of our community and engagement process. Again, I spoke about how we, put together a team and studied other jurisdictions. But even before I got here, City Council, as well as departments, have been looking at this since 21, 22, and otherwise. So, and again, we've made this really a team effort, going around the city, talking to the different departments. Talking to public safety is the way that we're doing this. Going to allow first responders to do what they need to do if something were to happen in the ADU or the primary house. How will this affect, trash pickup and recycling? So we've went around and continue to go around to different departments and really talk through this. So the legislation that we've put forth is very common sense. And then most importantly, we've reached out to the community. Not only to some of the advocates that are out there, different groups, nonprofits, building and housing organizations, and others, but we've also just everyday citizens who were interested in this. We also reached out to architects, attorneys, others that have experience in going through the previous process, as well as what it'll take for this to be successful. And then one important group that we engaged with was the area commissions. You see, the area commissions are the caretakers of our neighborhoods. They know their neighborhoods best. And so we reached out to them and we received feedback for several of them. I went out to a event for area commissioners and let them know a little bit about the legislation. And so I think that what we're doing here, this is the first step. The first step is making the process easier through the zoning code. And then there'll be subsequent things that'll go on probably, afterwards to make it better and better. And this is what we've seen in other communities. I mentioned, Seattle started it in 2005. They've had 4 or 5 different updates over the last 20 years as things have evolved. So, we will see. All right. Again, I mentioned some of the community groups and supporters. You can put those up on the board now. So we have organizations such as AARP, the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio, AHACO, Nationwide Children's Hospital, Healthy Homes, Families Flourish, and the Columbus Board of Realtors, for instance. And then in our engagement, we heard those community concerns. And in all these concerns, the emails, the letters, the calls, We summarized them kind of in 6 to 7 different areas. You know, there was concern about short-term rentals, neighborhood character and property, loss of property value, loss of privacy, safety, noise, traffic, infrastructure strain, environmental concerns, disability, accessibility. Is this just something that the affluent will be able to take advantage of? And then, of course, because we're doing something by right, would there be some loss of neighborhood control? And we had a public comment form that was open for over 60 days. And the results, 81% of the people that answered the survey were in support of accessory dwelling units in any residential district. We had some, we've documented many notable comments from the community as to what they thought about this. You know, for instance, just use as an example, one of the supporters said, "I'd love to see ADUs become an option for Columbus residents. ADUs can help resolve the housing crisis and help make Columbus more affordable. Thank you, Columbus City Council, for your consideration." And we had some opposition. I think that a one-size-fits-all approach is inappropriate in sensitive areas. I worry about tree loss, more hardscape safety, and absentee landlords. Okay. And then 2 particular areas of the legislation we had a lot of comments on. First of all, in the legislation, there's no requirement to create an additional parking spot if you build an ADU. Now, again, looking to other communities, we have, and even some surveys and otherwise from AARP, this has been something that when you start having parking requirements and everything, that stymies the growth of ADUs in a community. In many instances, additional parking is not needed. And so we had a survey question: do you support the proposal not to require off-street parking for ADUs? 65% were still in support. Secondly, which I mentioned before, short-term rentals. Okay. We asked the question, do you support the city regulating ADUs for this use of short-term rentals? 65% said they wanted ADUs regulated for short-term rentals. Well, as you well know, we have a short-term rental regulation and registry. And City Council, the administration is actually looking at updating that. It's something that we've heard from the citizens. We've got an eye on that, and we'll continue to move forward with further regulation regarding short-term rentals. And so let me talk about, just to wrap this up, and because I want to hear from the members of the public. This is the last hearing, and then next we will have the first reading at City Council will be on the date of November the 17th, and the final reading will be on November the 24th. And then we will vote on that. And so I look forward to continuing the dialogue with the community regarding this particular legislation. And with that, I want to bring forward members of the public for testimony. Our first speaker will be Jessica Klinger. Welcome to council.
Hi. Does this work? Does that work? It's weird to be on this side. Is that right? Does that work? Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilmember Beatty, Councilmember Bankston. And particularly want to thank you, Councilmember Beatty, for your focus on ADUs. I've admired your singular focus on this issue during your time on council. So thank you for inviting me to speak today. Some of you might be wondering why a council staff member is up here testifying. And I had shared in the past my experiences with ADUs with Councilmember Beatty. So he suggested that I testify today about my experience living in an ADU. So I'm going to start today talking a little bit about my family history. I am somebody who really likes learning about my family history, and I think it is connected to why I ended up living in an ADU. I am the great-granddaughter of Sadie and Danny Corey, who immigrated to Columbus from Lebanon in the early 1900s. They came through Ellis Island and settled in the immigrant neighborhood of Columbus that at the time was known as Flytown, but is now known as Victorian Village. They originally rented along Goodale Park, but eventually they were given a payment to move because the city of Columbus constructed a highway right where they were living at the time. They used that money they received from their landlord to buy a house on Neal Avenue in Victorian Village. They were entrepreneurial, like many immigrants in our community, and ran a five and dime store right by St. Francis in Victorian Village. It's because of them that they passed that house down through my family. My Uncle Pete ended up taking ownership after they passed away, and he renovated the barn in the backyard to be a carriage house so that family or visitors could stay there. It was small in the way it was constructed, very basic, had a bathroom, a small kitchen, and a loft where you could sleep. Did not have air conditioning or any fancy amenities, but throughout the years, they rented it to family and friends. And when my Uncle Pete died, it passed down to my second cousin, Paul, who now, to this day, owns that house on Neal Avenue and rents out the carriage house in the back. When I was working at the municipal court, when I was in my 20s, I did not make a lot of money, but decided I want to go back to grad school, but I didn't know where I could live if I both worked at the court and went back to grad school. My second cousin, Paul, heard about this and offered a very affordable rent to me to rent out the back carriage house while I was in grad school. This rental allowed me to go to grad school at night while I worked at the court. It allowed me to continue to work in a field that I was passionate about, reforming the eviction process in the county while getting the education to continue improving myself. I got married while I was living in that ADU. My husband moved in with me afterwards, who was in law school at the time. And that ADU is a very important part of my journey. It helped me achieve my dreams. I now own my own home and have 3 young kids and graduated from my master's program. And my cousin, to this day, still rents out that ADU. I'm a big believer that this legislation will help the larger continuum of housing options that we need to solve the housing crisis. We should allow families all the housing options to help our housing crisis. Maybe it's a second cousin like me, or their aging mother, or a friend. But I think we do need all these options to help our own community. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, in one moment, please. Could my staff bring me the list of speakers, the speakers list? Also wanted to recognize Councilman Nick Bankston. Thank you for coming today. Okay, our first speaker is Mr. Joe Motil.
Chair Beatty, Councilman Bankston. This ADU legislation will further increase the number of real estate investors and Wall Street private equity firms to gobble up even more single-family homes. In the first quarter of 2022, private equity firms acquired 25% of all homes in Columbus. In the Linden neighborhood, 36% of all home sales went to private equity. We are trying to prevent this from escalating, and the city is trying to promote it by falsely claiming ADUs are needed to help address our affordable housing crisis in the, quote, tsunami of population growth in Columbus that is yet to materialize. ADUs will also increase in maintenance complaints and code violations in our neighborhoods that already lack enforcement, while dealing with out-of-town investors and others who hide their identities through LLCs. Furthermore, ADU legislation will increase property values of home sales, thus reducing the inventory of homes for first-time home buyers due to the increased down payments and higher property taxes. Primarily, the rich real estate investors and Wall Street private equity firms will reap the benefits of ADUs. I've heard some of the ADU proponents claim ADUs will provide cheaper housing opportunities. The city has no data on what that average rent is currently being charged for ADUs. I suspect that rents are set at market rate in order for the investor to recoup their $60,000 to $125,000 or more investments. The city has no data on how current ADUs are used, whether it's a granny suite, guest house, or rental. After a grandparent has passed, then what is the ADU used for? How many tenants are permitted to live in an ADU? They should not be permitted as short-term rentals. Who and how are ADUs going to be monitored for compliance? Since an ADU will be given a separate address, this opens the door for investors to request lot split variances, thus bringing in the usual city hall campaign contributing zoning attorneys and their law firms who will get their clients' variances rubber stamped by city council as usual with no input from area commissions, civic associations, and taxpayers. How is the city going to address additional stormwater runoff in our already overcapacity combined stormwater and sewer system that flows into the Olentangy and Soda rivers? Detached ADUs will create the removal of green space, which adversely impacts the environment, ecosystem, and will increase Columbus's #1 ranking as the fastest growing urban heat island affected city in the U.S. If an investor removes a 20-inch caliber tree to construct a detached ADU, are they required to replace that 20-inch tree? The city's just removing way too many trees, and we already have a current 22% pathetic tree canopy coverage, so these kind of developments are hurting it even more. In closing, this ADU proposal is just one more tool for developers and real estate investors to pad their bank accounts. I don't have too much of a problem with second-level garage and carriage house ADUs as long as the owner lives on the parcel, but I am 100% opposed to allowing freestanding, detached so-called ADUs with the proposed height limits, setbacks, and the fire safety, environmental, and privacy issues that reduced setbacks will create. I don't want to look out my backyard and see my neighbor's 25-foot tall, 700 to 1,000 square foot apartment building, nor should anyone else have to. This proposal is a neighborhood character destroying land grab and dream come true for developers, real estate investors, and Wall Street equity firms. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Department have any response, for instance? No? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Motil. Our next speaker will be Mr. Michael Wilkos from United Way of Central Ohio.
Committee Chair Beatty, Councilmember Bankston. My name is Michael Wilkos, and I'm a proud resident of the City of Columbus for the past 38 years. And as always, it's an honor and a privilege to provide testimony at Council. I'm here today to express my support for the allowance of accessory dwelling units in Columbus. For the past 17 years, I've lived in the Wineland Park neighborhood, a dense walkable community that has experienced significant multifamily and single-family construction over the past 15 years. Between 2010 and 2020, Wineland Park's population surged by 47%. As new investments continue to be added to the neighborhood with more under construction, planned and proposed, Wineland Park is on track to surpass its previous population peak of over 50 years ago. In the last few years, 5 accessory dwelling units have been built in the neighborhood, including 2 directly across the street from my house. The scale and architecture is appropriate for surrounding properties. They've added investment to the neighborhood. They've added a diversity of housing typology and are utilizing land in the alley that had previously been vacant or supported dilapidated garages. Yet the journey to get these ADUs constructed was cumbersome and timely. Due to this, there was universal support from neighbors, the area commission, and city government, but the process was still difficult to navigate and expensive for those property owners to complete. As you already know, ADUs offer many benefits to our city. They provide space for family or caregivers, help seniors age in place, add additional income revenue for homeowners, could offer a new housing typology in certain neighborhoods, and enable families to expand beyond their primary home. In my professional role, I'm Vice President of Community Engagement at United Way of Central Ohio. I serve on the Central Ohio Stable Housing Network, the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio, and I currently chair the Franklin County Continuum of Care, the planning body for our community around people experiencing homelessness. In these various roles, there is universal concern over the current lack of housing. The increase in housing instability affects the classroom. As families move around looking for cheaper housing, children can miss school and get off track academically. It contributes to a high rate of eviction and is costing our homeless system to see increased cost and longer stays in shelter. Many people who now enter our shelter system are staying at unprecedented lengths. Just 6 years ago, people in our shelter system would stay an average of 55 days. That has now jumped to over 50% to 84 days, the highest on record. The number one reason we cannot get people out of shelter, there are no rental units to move people into. The solution to our limited housing supply will come in dozens of solutions. ADUs are just one of those solutions, and I thank Columbus City Council for their work looking at any and all solutions for housing. I'm a big supporter of this legislation, and I think the changes we are making now will serve our city for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask my fellow council member if he has any questions or comments for the speaker.
No, Mr. Wilkos, that's a lot of feedback. Mr. Wilkos, I'll ask you just to elaborate, because I think you've been looking at this trend of population for many years. For those that think that these are fictitious people that don't exist, what are you seeing? And we were talking about that supply and demand, right? Even if we don't grow, say, at the number that we're talking about, that supply and demand still determines the cost of rent.
Yes.
And how that plays into what we're seeing happening. You bring up a very good point around the stay in our homeless shelters. In my work when I was at Gladden, one of the rehousing providers here, even the length of time it took us to find a unit, even with cash, the ability to pay that deposit, pay that first month's rent, went from an average of 60 days to 90 days just to find a place. So again, that population piece, and then talk about also supply and demand, that history that you have seen in the city, where at once upon a time we had relatively stable rents, and I'm guessing that is because we had ample supply to our population size and demand that was there.
Yeah. Greg Colburn out of the University of Washington has published the book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And he says there are really 2 conditions that contribute to when a city will see an increase in homelessness. It has nothing to do with whether or not your city has nicer weather than other places across the country. It has nothing to do with drug addiction. It also has nothing to do with whether or not your city has gracious benefits or tight benefits. He said there are two things that you can track that will determine what will happen with the city's homelessness. Number one is whether or not your rental vacancy rate has hit 5% or below and stays there, and whether or not rents are appreciating faster than incomes. So what his research showed about Columbus was prior to 2019, the 5 years prior to 2019, rents in Columbus appreciated 3.3% annually. That is about where inflation was at that time, a little faster. Since 2019, rents for apartments have appreciated 6.6%. In 2024, Zillow reported that rents in Franklin County jumped 8.8% in 10 months. The number one reason is the lack of supply, where we're now building around 13,000 units of production annually across the metropolitan region. Most analysts are suggesting we should be delivering 19 to 21,000 units of production in order to meet household formation. Another statistic I like to reference is what is the ratio between demand and housing availability over the last 15 to 20 years. As recently as 2010, we had 107 housing units for every 100 households across the region. By 2020, that had shrunk to 102 housing units for every 100 households. Based on household formation and population growth, we're on track to just be at 96 housing units for every 100 households by the end of the decade. This is already the situation that Seattle's and Portland's and Austin's and Denver's have found themselves in. That's why their rents are so high. That's why their home prices are so high. And that's why their homeless ecosystems have really crumbled under the weight of that pressure. Anything we can do, in my opinion, to generate housing units of any typology in any location at any time will serve our city well.
And thinking about that population growth, right, there's projections and that say they could go in many different directions. I think that we're trending in the direction that we know that it's going to grow. That is typically for the larger Columbus metropolitan area. But how much of that is actually going to be absorbed in Franklin County and in Columbus?
So Franklin County between 2010 and 2020 grew by 44 people every single day. Last year, Franklin County grew by 47 people a day, and that's 47 out of the 82 people that we added either through births or migration. We're coming into Franklin County. The city of Columbus typically captures about 65% of that growth. So basically the ratio the city of Columbus currently is of the metropolitan region, we continue to share that proportional growth. Actually, between 2010 and 2020, the city of Columbus grew faster than the remainder of Franklin County, and it grew faster than the remainder of the metropolitan region. Columbus was one of only a handful of cities that grew faster than its suburban ring.
Thank you for that.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
My pleasure.
The next speaker will be Anna Tene Consongo of Oaxaca.
Good afternoon, City Council and Councilmember Beatty. My name is Anna Teka Songo, and I'm speaking for the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. Previously, I represented Convergence Columbus, and I am proud that both organizations and their combined 160 members support accessory dwelling units as a tool to close our local housing gaps. Our mission is to ensure that all our neighbors have a safe and affordable place to live. Unfortunately, today, 52,000 families in Franklin County alone are severely cost-burdened, paying more than half their income toward housing, leaving them with insufficient funds to pay for food, childcare, medicine, and other necessities. It is not just severe cost burdens. This problem is impacting families across our community. Other troubling indicators show that the cost of buying a home has more than doubled in the past decade, far outpacing incomes. Evictions are on track to post the highest filing rate in our community's history, and unsheltered homelessness is projected to grow by 68% in the coming years. And half of all our Columbus residents have been personally or negatively impacted by our housing shortage. It is for these reasons that I thank Council for its proposal to allow ADUs, not only because it is one solution that addresses our need for naturally affordable housing, but also because 83% of our neighbors support zoning laws that permit ADUs. This supermajority recognizes that ADUs help elderly parents age in place and with dignity. They understand that homeowners desire and deserve to have the flexibility to build in their own backyards on land they own and pay taxes on to serve their family's needs without having to navigate an expensive and arduous maze of red tape. This is a simple and powerful request. We know that carriage houses, duplexes, and other missing middle styles are a Columbus tradition and are part of the fabric of our neighborhoods, especially historic areas like Victorian Village, German Village, and Clintonville. This often forgotten architectural history kept families together while fostering a broad and vibrant community. Unsurprisingly, these same areas are some of the most valuable and desirable neighborhoods in our city because of this culture of connectivity and community. It is because of our diversity, both in people and housing styles, that we have character, strength, and resiliency. This is a true promise of Columbus's neighborhoods. Zoning regulations that date back to the 1950s, in an era where laws prioritize segregation and sprawl, are standing in the way of that promise. AHACO believes that ADUs can expand Central Ohio's housing choices to better meet the demands of our vibrant and evolving neighborhoods. Council's proposal adopted factors that made ADUs successful in peer cities, such as pre-approved design standards, reasonable setback requirements, and citywide access. Moreover, Council's proposal trusts people to make mobility decisions that are right for them without the government forcing them to pay for amenities they may not need or want. Thank you, Council, for realizing, researching, and capturing the real opportunities that ADUs will provide our communities. Thank you, Council, for listening to the supermajority.
Okay, I would like you to stay there and put on your other hat for convergence. And I also would like Karina Johnson to come up with you, because I have a couple questions.
Yes. Also grateful for our other members who are in attendance today.
Okay. One of the, I think it was within my first month of being on council, I attended one of the ADU Sprint convergence meetings, okay? And I shut my mouth. I had to listen to everybody for sure on that. Could you tell me about that initiative, when that started, like how many years ago, approximately how many people are in your database, and just, kind of summarize, what you've heard from the citizens regarding, ADUs and just the desire for those in our community?
Yes, so it started off, Convergence Columbus has a housing supply work stream. And last year, the group decided to focus on ADUs. Why? Because when advancing Black and minority homeownership, we understand that property tax hikes, rising property home prices were a barrier to entry for not only getting into homes, but preserving them once you had them. So the housing supply work stream built an ADU work group. Let's see what other cities are doing. Let's see what is the current process in Columbus, and let's try to create solutions for our financial institutions, our housing counselors, and our real estate agents to build a pathway for ADUs for our Black and minority homeowners.
And what type of individuals showed up at these particular meetings? The one I went to, I think there was probably about 50, 55 people, 60 people at it. But what type of, were just homeowners, people from banking, what type of people showed up at these meetings?
So for the workstream meetings, we have about 120 organizations. Housing supply was mainly real estate agents, lenders, and real estate agents and lenders and nonprofit partners. The ADU sprints, which I'll let Karina jump in because I was on maternity leave during then, saw government, non-government, architects, AARP, developers, real estate partners and lenders at the table to talk about, let's create hands-on strategies to build towards ADUs.
Hi, Karina Johnson, Rise Together Innovation Institute, member of the Convergence Columbus Workstream. I also want to add that I would say the conversation didn't start at the sprint, did start at the Workstream potentially, but there was a Housing for All ADU conversation that happened at the Hilltop Library that was convened by the city last fall. I was the moderator for that. We had some really great speakers. That was primarily residents in Columbus. We had about 50 folks attend, and I was actually really surprised that no one came out against ADUs. It was a really great conversation. If anything, most folks were frustrated that the current zoning code didn't really make it easy to build ADUs, and then they were curious how they were going to be able to afford to build them. And then I would echo everything Anna already said about the sprint. We had probably 40, 50 folks in the room. It was mostly practitioners, like folks who are already working in the nonprofit housing space. We had area commissioners. We had folks representing seniors. So, and the purpose of the sprint was to divide into groups. We had, I think, 4 different groups looking at design, financing, zoning, and outreach, and to create a tool that could be used in 2 months to make the case to the city at large, including to council and the city of Columbus, that ADUs were something that folks wanted and needed.
Okay, and, I know we're hopefully going to pass this legislation. Is that that group's not going to go away? You're going to be here keeping us accountable for the next things that have to occur, right?
Exactly. So we haven't disappeared. After the sprints, the group decided to look at financing solutions. So we're now looking at what lenders currently have when it comes to renovation loans, construction loans, and seeing where the gap is to potentially build financing to make ADU development more affordable. We also did a learning exchange with San Diego Housing Commission and Casita Coalition. They had a remarkable construction loan that I know Karina shared copies with council. But yeah, we're looking at financing because we need to make them affordable now that, fingers crossed, the variance process is not a barrier.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add, just overall?
Yes,
Either of you?
bloom614.org. This is our one-stop shop home buying resource for Black and minority communities in Columbus. We started with an ADU infographic. What is an ADU? Why should you care? Here is a high level how to get the process started. And that website will continue to expand as we have more solutions available for the community.
And I would just add that the first time I testified, I think I showed a map of where current ADUs existed in the city. And to Anna's point, our neighborhoods that have more people of color, people with lower incomes don't have ADUs. And if we want ADUs to be accessible to folks who are not higher income or developers, as some of the concern that was mentioned today, finding those accessible pathways to financing is going to be key. And so just really eager to work with council and Convergence to figure out how to make that happen.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your continued engagement and advocacy.
Thank you for having us.
Next, we have Nathaniel Wilkins. Thank you,
1612 Arlington Avenue, Mr. Nathaniel George Wilkins, as a resident of the North Linden area. I don't know too much about this, but I'm going to speak for this, and because I think there can be another great idea for people that's disability in wheelchairs and all the way blind. I think this will be a great opportunity, but I didn't hear nothing far as this type of thing for the accessibility, hearing impaired and blind. My wife would have came down here, and I'm going to speak about her testimonials because she she lived with her family for 51 years, and I think at the age that she is now, she was here Monday night, and to talk about her opportunity not to live on her own, to be more independently, I would think this would be a great idea for all type of people. But I hear a lot of time we talk about people with elderly, but not such as the disability, hearing impaired and blind, and people that's in wheelchairs. This is a great opportunity, but I do want to emphasize on several things here. In older neighborhoods, you have houses that was built in 1910, 1900s, and 1800s. Those should be the first priorities because some of those houses have architect and design, brick, and stucco at the time. When you look at new builds, houses be built up with wood and masonry and brick and stuff like that. I'm all in support of this. Let's give this to everybody. Let's give it to everybody. As far as disability, people that's hearing impaired, and we want to do what you call modifications for the blind. Now, let me say that again, for the blind, because when you have a separate house with a separate address, maybe another address can be tied onto that in front of the parcel. Say there's 2 lots on this house. Beginning with, because I live right across the street from 1597 Arlington Avenue. That house has that address, then it has another address, but it doesn't say Arlington Avenue. So, when we look at this, we want to look at this for all of Columbus. I don't know if this is include apartments or townhomes, but again, I'm all for this. But again, I think this is a good idea, but I would like to hear more information about what are we doing for people that's in wheelchairs and also for the mentally handicapped, to give those people opportunity to learn how to live on their own. And I want to say thank you again for this.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins, for your comments. I think that on the issue of individuals who may have some type of disability, you really can, look to the advocacy of AARP as well. Obviously, a person that's more senior may have some, particular physical limitations and otherwise. But one of the good things about creating a accessory dwelling unit is that it can be customized to the needs of who it's going to be intended for. Unlike others would have you believe, there was a study by the Urban Land Institute, their housing division, that 65% of people that build ADUs it's for self-use for a family member. Yeah, maybe it's a rental later on, but it is for use of a family member. And so, again, in most instances, we're dealing with a situation where it's going to be somewhat custom built. And in many instances, it'll be, and some people have actually, they might have the primary house that all the bedrooms are upstairs, and they do an ADU to move everybody downstairs and have a different option. And so thank you very much for your comments. This is, again, one of the legislative objectives was to give Columbus families and homeowners housing options. So thank you very much for your comment, and we will be happy to meet with you, give you more information about this. Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Brenton McGill.
Chair Beatty, Councilman Bankston. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to describe how making it easier to convert my existing carriage home in Clintonville could be a benefit to my family. I have an aging mother who will eventually be coming to live with my wife and I in our small 2-bedroom, single-bath home. And My mother is a woman who values her privacy and independence, which makes my small home a less than ideal living situation for her and my wife and I. Allowing my family to convert our existing carriage home into an ADU would allow me to care for my mother as she ages, while still allowing her to maintain some independence. Allowing ADUs would aid in my mother's ability to maintain both her comfort and dignity. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. McGill. Please stay engaged. I think we have great things coming out in the future that'll be able to aid you in your pursuit of doing that for your mother. Okay, our final speaker is Mr. Benjamin Perryman.
Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for having me today. We're looking at a great opportunity for the city to be able to enable people to have more housing options and potentially double the amount of units in our housing stock at some point. And I really appreciate the courage to say that this is a starting point and not an end point, where this is an opportunity to get our foot in the door and start making progress towards this thing that people have been looking for a long time. I know that AARP has been working for 25 years now. I've been working for the past 7 years. I started looking at ADUs in 2018 and filed for my first council variance in fall of 2019. And in the time since, my startup, Restack Studio, has been working to find ways to empower homeowners, not just as community members, but as developers and stakeholders in the real estate environment. A developer is someone who recognizes that there's a market need for something or that there's something missing from a neighborhood and takes the steps to actually fill those spaces on their own. And when we put homeowners in those positions, we need to be cognizant of the restrictions and shortcomings that they might face within that process. And so we want to be committed to ensuring that homeowners can be as successful as possible through the entire process, going from construction through operations of a property. And with that, we just want the city to recognize that with that investment that homeowners are making, there's going to be not just a need, but a lot of demand for improvements to our alleyway system at large. And once again, recognizing this as a starting point, seeing that people's investment, not necessarily everyone who builds these is going to be in the same position as many developers. So to just see that their investment is being taken care of in the same way that we see utility and just built environment upgrades, the alleyways could really benefit from that. And I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, before you leave, you mentioned that you've been involved for, how long have you been involved in the real estate field?
I've been in the real estate field for about 15 years now.
Okay, and I believe, we have a relationship. You also have a degree. What are your degrees in, sir?
Yes, I have a undergraduate degree from Ohio State in sociology, and I have a master's degree from MIT in real estate development.
Okay, and when did you start your company?
I started my company in the fall of 2021. We were a part of a startup incubator where we were given resources to explore the alleyways in Columbus and how they could be improved. And ADUs are just an easy first step.
Okay, and you also have a background with older neighborhoods and historical homes, both through you worked for Columbus Landmarks, correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and then also you're again, a lot of property in the Near East Side, our historical neighborhood.
Absolutely. The Near East Side Historical Neighborhood is actually where we did our first council variance. There's been a med student living in it for the past 3 years now.
Okay, and I do want to, point out again, you and also your family has a tradition of providing housing, as your father was the former executive director of Central Ohio Habitat for Humanity, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And with that experience, I've gotten a lot of experience in not just affordable housing, but property management, and recognizing that the development process starts with construction, it doesn't end there. And ensuring that people have quality housing for time to come is really important to me.
Okay, and then just in your experience trying to get that first variance, did you see how did you find the previous process?
The previous process was something that we found navigable at some point, but we recognized that it was a very big deterrent for homeowners. So many people who have been interested and even recognized that that process was there didn't take the steps to actually go through it just because it has a little bit of intimidation. So to see that removed is really exciting.
And so for your future company or current company, have you been approached by homeowners to perform this service on their behalf?
Yes, we've performed the service on behalf of homeowners before, we're looking at how, now that that's gone, how we can help homeowners through more of the process, going beyond just that starting point.
Okay, all right. Anything else that you'd like to add here today?
Yes, I'd just like to add that my startup Restacks, our URL is restacks.studio, and let people know that they can access resources to begin the construction process and understand what an ADU can mean for them.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just ask, I just wanted to highlight and comment on something that you said, particularly around this word developer. I think that folks hear the word developer and they think of like large conglomerates of folks, and that may be true. But to say that homeowners themselves can develop their property and be a part of this solution is just so critical. And I want to underscore that this is not just simply an opportunity for us to more densify our neighborhoods and use our land in a more efficient way, because we're not creating more of that. Right? But this is also, I think, an opportunity to build wealth for folks, for legacy homeowners who find themselves maybe on a fixed income or find themselves a second generation homeowner of their home that was passed down to them, right? And so I think that that's a point that we need to make too, that this is an opportunity, particularly I think in some of our black and brown neighborhoods or historic neighborhoods, for homeowners to have an opportunity to build wealth while also being additive to the community. And so thank you for highlighting that, because I think that gets missed sometimes in this conversation that we're in. So again, thank you for what you're doing. And I'm really excited about what this could do for some of our legacy neighborhoods.
I appreciate it, Councilman Bankston, and Councilman Beatty. I appreciate your time as well.
Okay, we have no more public speakers on the agenda. Again, I would like to thank everybody that has participated. I'm really excited about this. I've been working on this almost my entire tenure here on City Council, which will end at the end of next month. And I put a slide up about my legislative objectives, but it still goes back to the personal story and personal experience that I have. And my sister and I, we partnered to convert my sister's garage into an ADU for our 88-year-old mother. And that's made, all the difference in the world for her life. And, but I think about, the whole effect. We hired a small architect, solo architect, to design it. We hired a small remodeling company to actually, do the work. I moved my mother from a small one-bedroom condominium, and I owned it, and I sold that for, I think, maybe $135,000. So someone else, I opened up a inexpensive unit for somebody else. And so, the ripple effects of this, opportunity, it's hard to just totally put, into words. And, my intention was to give this opportunity for families and homeowners, as many as, it's interesting because, our first hearing, I think we had 17 people come and testify. We had a number of people come in. We have not had one or even really reached out to us, an organization or individuals that were excited about this for a developer or totally investment opportunity. And again, ADUs, they already exist in our community, and we've heard story after story about how they've changed people's lives. The wealth building component, the use by family members, extra income sometimes, just a plethora of uses. And so, I believe my intentions are pure here. There's not some secret agenda. And I look forward to the vote at the end of the month to pass this legislation. And as a final note, I wanted to note that we did receive 3 pieces of written testimony. One that came from Candace Klepniks, another one that came from Judy Minister, who is a realtor in the north part of Columbus. I remember her signs from my moving and storage days. And then from another real estate broker, Jerry O'Neill. And as we had on the screen, we also, again, have the support of the Columbus Board of Realtors. So once again, I want to thank everyone's participation, your input. I encourage you to stay engaged and hold us at council, hold the administration accountable, because what we're doing here insofar as changing the zoning code to make the process easier, as we've heard from other testimony, there are other barriers that are going to have to be crossed, financing, finding contractors, utility connections, all kinds of other things as well. But I believe that as this, and we've seen from those states and cities in the western part of the United States, once it opens up and more of them start being built and people become aware on how to do it and getting more comfortable, it will grow, it will become easier, it will become less expensive. So I want to thank everyone, and I challenge everyone to stay engaged and keep up your advocacy. Thank you very much, and I will call this hearing to end at this time. Thank you.